As a young trans woman in college, I once met someone on a hookup app who ruined and nearly took my life. Assault and abuse are heavy topics that most people would rather brush under the rug. But since the justice system failed me, I've been on my own journey to find answers for myself. And maybe by sharing my story and starting a larger conversation around trauma, mental health, and identity, I can hopefully help you stay safer out there, or at least feel less alone. My name is AJ Nichols, and welcome to The Will of the Hunted, the podcast. This podcast is for support and commentary, not professional advice. I am not a licensed clinician. This podcast also contains graphic and challenging discussions about sexual assault, self-harm, drugging, grooming, abuse, and emergency medical care. Listener discretion is advised. I am an almost 27-year-old transgender woman from Bangor, Maine. I'm also a former news and talk show producer. I was a junior at Northeastern in Boston studying business with a minor in fashion studies when all of this happened. And my life changed forever and almost ended in November 2019. Now, I'm trying to figure out why I'm still here and how I live with what happened to me. I have complex PTSD, and I have other neurological conditions from what happened that are in the process of being diagnosed. This is the only episode of this show where I'm going to be fully alone, and this is hopefully the only time I'm going to talk about everything in this much detail. This is going to be kind of a documentary style episode, but going forward, I will be having guests come on and we'll talk about trauma, identity, and mental health. So this is my story. I'm not going to just be recalling what happened. I'm going to be asking the tough questions. This is also being filmed for YouTube. I will be showing pictures and videos. They will be censored. I will not be revealing the identity of the man who hurt me and who hurt my friends. Boston area police know who he is, and I need to keep myself as safe as I can. This episode will be very upsetting, so all of the trigger warnings I mentioned, please heed them. If you decide to keep listening, please practice self-care while you're doing it. I'm going to also be practicing self-care on camera, and I will also be doing breaks and check-ins. And if at any point you yourself need help, we have a full list of resources on our website. Just go to thewillofthehunted.com/resources. And while you're listening, if you feel compelled to take action in any form, please make a donation to the Boston Area Rape Crisis Center, also known as BARCC. We will have a link down in the description and on our website as well to their donation page. Thank you. Also a quick thank you and shout out to the band Vices Inc. and my roommate Eleanor Langthorne for letting me borrow some audio equipment to get started. Okay, so before I get into what happened, I want to provide some very necessary context for who I was at the time, and huge context about my first relationship and how that set me up for getting hunted. I had come out and publicly transitioned in the spring of 2017, and I graduated from high school as a woman about a month or two later. And I decided that when I got to college and when I moved to Boston, I would have a fresh start and I would be stealth, which means that I wanted to pass as much as I possibly could. I would not be telling people I was trans unless I absolutely had to. And I also come from a very small, pretty conservative town in rural Maine. And I was pretty sheltered moving into a huge city like Boston. I also had no dating experience before I transitioned. So I never had guys paying attention to me. And I would just entertain myself and daydream about having a relationship. but I never actually expected one to happen. I really wanted to be in love and have a boyfriend when I got to college. I thought that would complete my transition, and I would be able to live the life as a woman that I always wanted. In August of 2017, I moved into my freshman dorm, Spear Hall. Within my first week on campus, I was on dating apps and going on dates. When I started doing this, I realized that I was so afraid of rejection that I was not telling the guys I was going on dates with that I was trans. And I really hoped that people meeting me and getting to know me before hearing the label or the backstory would maybe make them feel differently about dating me. One of those dates was my first boyfriend. My first boyfriend was a student at another school who lived on the same street as me. On our first date, I went to his apartment and he cooked me dinner. The date went really well and I was really excited about dating him, but I was terrified that he would shoot me down when I told him I was trans. So the next day, I wrote him a letter explaining that I was trans, that I was pre-op, and that I was sorry, and I would get surgery as soon as I could, and I hoped he would still consider dating me. It was already kind of a problem that I was devaluing myself for being trans and putting myself down for things that were out of my control to try to get someone to like me. But he said he didn't care, and we officially started dating. But his promise about not caring fell apart pretty quickly. When we first started becoming intimate, he refused to touch me in that area. I was already embarrassed about being pre-op, but I didn't realize that apologizing for it was also enabling him to neglect my own needs even further. For example, he wouldn't let me spoon him because he didn't want my male genitals near his ass. You can do the math on that one. As a newly transitioned woman, I was still very afraid of being feminine and presenting very feminine and girly. So I was hanging on to a lot of old clothing styles. I had basically just gotten rid of all my male clothes and bought the female versions of the exact same thing. So you weren't seeing me in a dress. You weren't seeing me in makeup. You weren't seeing me with my hair done. I was wearing a sweatshirt and shorts and hair in a messy bun. But he was not super down with that, and he started getting really controlling about what I wore, and he really wanted to make me the woman of his dreams. Towards the holidays of that first semester, his parents both had work parties, and my ex asked me to go with him, but he said that he would not take me if I was wearing pants. I told him I was not comfortable wearing a dress because I was pre-op and I was worried people would see that. He said that he would pay for me to pick out a dress or I would be left behind. So I went and picked out a dress. I was terrified the whole time I wore the dress, but I did it because I really wanted to be there for him and his family, and I loved him. And I wanted to do everything I could for him to love me back the same way. But at the same time, I started getting resentful and rebellious. I started getting extremely insecure and very jealous of all of his friends who were quote unquote normal girls, because I was convinced that I was not good enough for him and he might cheat. So I would go through his phone at night, which I'm not proud of, but I understand how he treated me, pushed me there. Spring of 2018, I started to acknowledge that I was feeling left out of intimacy. I asked him if he would consider touching me, and he said he wasn't comfortable. I tried to stuff my feelings because, hey, I had a boyfriend and I was in love like I always wanted. Instead, I started pouring myself into fashion design as an escape. My grandmother taught me how to sew in high school, and at this point in my journey at Northeastern, I had picked up the new Global Fashion Studies minor, and I was learning how to make clothes. I also did a brief internship with a designer from Project Runway, and I really wanted to make a name for myself and express myself and be more confident than all of the insecurities that I felt and that were being put on me. So I created a clothing brand called Avant-Garde Expression, or AGX, and I made intentionally genderfuck clothes. I wanted to make a statement and say, I'm going to be androgynous as fuck because you want me to be a woman. So suck on it. And I really wanted to break down gender roles with my designs. And I think that was my way of kind of fighting against my relationship while being trapped in it. I did a photo shoot with my brother with some of my clothing designs and my final project from fashion class. I had a cropped open jacket and basketball shorts, and I wore a sports bra, and I felt hella cool. This was the first time where I had someone criticize me for being feminine, since I was so used to my boyfriend telling me that I wasn't feminine enough. So I was wearing my sports bra, I was squatting in the yard, and I had someone close to me tell my mom that I looked promiscuous or slutty. That really confused and angered me because I felt confident in those pictures. No one had a problem when I had my shirt off before, but now I can't even show midriff. I was like, oh my God, these rules, I have to play by a whole different set of rules now. This sucks. I was furious. That summer, I got hired for my first internship, my first co-op through Northeastern at Reebok headquarters in the Seaport. They had a maker's lab and they had sewing machines, and I would sneak down there and make more clothes. I would also get free clothes and shoes that were samples from their collections, and I loved wearing them, especially when they were men's clothing and shoes, because I still thought they looked cool. One time, my boyfriend and I took his cousin shopping, and I wanted to wear a mesh running cap that I got from Reebok. When we got out of the car at a store, he told me he did not want me wearing it inside. He said it made me look like a Middle Eastern man, and he ripped it off my head, threw it in the car, and walked into the store without saying anything. I was floored. I was so hurt and upset, and I didn't know what to do, so I did nothing. I probably gave him a cold shoulder for 20 minutes, and then I was back to needing his attention and validation. That fall, 2018, I made a plan to ask him again if he would consider reciprocating intimately. I made this plan of like, what if I cover up most of my genitals to just reveal like kind of the most sensitive parts and ask him to pretend that I was post-op and try to do stuff back to me. He said he didn't want to, and especially because of the smell. For context, I was so ashamed of having a bulge that I would wear several layers of underwear at the same time to try to flatten everything, but that also meant no airflow and a lot of BO. I said I really wanted to feel included, and his response was, I'm a straight man, what do you expect? There were occasional moments where he did attempt to reciprocate, but they were short-lived and fleeting. I also noticed him reading Rub Maps reviews in the same room as me. For context, those are reviews for massage parlors where sexual services are performed for money. I confronted him, obviously concerned and justified, and told him he needed to tell me everything. He admitted to having gone to them in the past and that one had been busted for trafficking. But my dumbass stayed with him. At this time, he was also having a little bit of an identity crisis. He dropped out of college and moved back in with his mom. After living together for the better part of a year and a half, we were now living 45 minutes apart. And on my last day of sophomore year, he was at his home outside the city, and I was in my dorm for the last night before I moved back to Maine for the summer. And he said he was too tired to come back into the city to see me and say goodbye. I called him and begged him and cried and just asked him. I said, I really want to see you. I'm about to go back home for a few months. Like, please come in. and he reluctantly did. And that made me feel pretty worthless, especially when I wasn't going to see him for weeks or even a month. So I moved back home. That summer, I was starting to experiment with makeup for the first time. I liked eyeliner. I liked making big wings. I loved dramatic eye makeup. He told me I was doing it wrong and that I should do it small and natural like the women at his workplace. I felt bad about myself, but I kept doing the eyeliner anyways. Then something big happened. A photographer for a trans magazine offered to shoot my clothing designs in New York City. This was the coolest thing to ever happen to me. My best friend, Bria, who is now helping with the brand, came down to New York with my mom, my brother, and I. The collection was all trans colors. I made a jumpsuit top with basketball shorts exclusively for the shoot. My ex told me I didn't have any taste and told me I should wear jeans with the top instead of the basketball shorts. I ignored him and I was pissed and I wore the full jumpsuit anyways. Around this time, I really wanted to come back out publicly as trans, and he did not like that. I told him that I was sick of my identity being a secret in his family. He had told his mom, but his mom and him were afraid of his dad finding out. I told him that he had to tell his dad. He was worried that his dad wouldn't see him as straight if he knew he was dating a trans girl. I really felt the rift start opening between us. A couple months later, I moved back to Boston to start my second co-op. He was still living outside the city, and he would come visit me once a week. I visited him 3 or 4 times a week by taking the train down to his house. There was a night when we were in my dorm that summer when I wanted to be intimate with him, but he flat out refused. We had really not seen each other in a long time, and I missed him, and I missed him physically, and I just wanted to be intimate. He told me he wished I already had surgery. He told me he missed vagina, and he hated how long he had to wait for me to prepare the alternative. I also lived with his family for 2 weeks while I was waiting to get into my fall housing. He was now working overnights and was always asleep when I was there, but I was hoping that kind of pretending to live with him again would help us get closer, since we hadn't been living together for months at that point. I really hoped that our relationship would come back together. But once I moved into my fall apartment on Cunard Street, the end of the relationship started feeling imminent. I told my brother and my friends at work that I was not happy. My friends told me I should break up with him, but I said I was too scared to. I didn't want to be alone. But I tried to be brave enough, and I left work early one day, mad as hell about everything he had put me through. I took the train to his house, and I told him we need to talk. I told him I wanted a break, and that made him sad, and he said, everything's fine, just cuddle, let's just cuddle. I caved, and I dropped it, and unfortunately things started getting even worse. Now being neglected for almost 2 years in a relationship where I was in love, but my needs were not being met, and I was being put down and criticized and always made to feel like I was not good enough for him. I started getting desperate for any kind of attention and validation. I started dressing even more provocatively in my fashion shoots. He told me his mom saw one of my pictures and told him that I looked like a whore. I started spinning out. One night at his house, I took a bunch of nudes in the bathroom and texted it to him, hoping he'd be interested. When I went back into the bedroom and asked him if he got them, he yelled at me, telling me he didn't want those on his phone. He actually raised his voice and yelled at me for the first time in our relationship. And that was the first time he actually really made me scared. I told him I was going to sleep on the couch downstairs. And then he just switched. And he said he didn't remember yelling at me and I should just come to bed. He wanted to cuddle. I caved again. Now we get to November 2019, the month where everything happened. At the beginning of November, a business coach who had been helping me with my clothing brand had an idea. For context, when I first met this business coach, he told me I was marketable as a young woman. Now, after nearly a year of working together, he told me about this Boston local Barstool podcast he was a huge fan of. He told me that some rich dude was accusing the hosts of being transphobic and they needed to defend themselves. He told me I should make a video offering to go on the show and mediate a debate between them. This was not mediation. This was just being a token. Just to make that clear. But I thought that I could use this opportunity to get my name out there as a designer and maybe help people understand trans people better. Especially the connotations of the Barstool audience. And about this time, I had also come back out publicly against my boyfriend's wishes. And I also had volunteered for the Trans Foundation that helped me get into a clinic when I was younger. I was really hungry to be a public advocate. And I made the video, I put it on Twitter, I got DM'd by the host, and I got cast for an episode of the show. I did not know anything about the show. I did not know who the hosts were. I had not listened to any episodes. I tried to a little bit before I went on, but I had literally had no context for the show besides what my business coach had told me. When I got there, I was manic. I was like, I'm a star. I'm gonna make everyone like trans people. And I was in a room alone with 3 men, at least twice my age, and they kind of flirted and toyed with me. I mentioned that I made the shirt I was wearing, and they said that one of the producers would want to see it off of me. I talked about my first relationship, and I said that we were going to get married, and I was projecting. The host said that I was only 21, and that guy was the first I had ever been with, and I needed to explore other aisles in the grocery store or something like that. He said I would ditch my ex. And I didn't really know how to process that in the moment. So I started joking about asking the host to marry me instead. I did get to talk a lot about my transition, but then the sports debate came up and they made me arm wrestle one of the hosts to decide if trans people were too strong to be in normal sports or whatever. Yikes. When the episode came out, it got a lot of attention. Suddenly, I had a lot of male Barstool fans sliding into my DMs, and it was exciting to finally feel desirable for the first time as a woman. But I always stayed faithful to my ex. I got several hundred followers on Twitter very quickly. My ex resented the attention I was getting and said it changed me. We watched Gaga and Bradley Cooper's A Star is Born when it came out in theaters the year before. And he made a statement saying, "Do you want me to end up like that guy?" If you haven't seen it, spoilers, but Bradley Cooper's character basically helps his girlfriend Gaga get discovered as a singer. And when she gets famous, he gets jealous. He's super addicted to alcohol and substances and kills himself. So that was what my boyfriend was putting on me. And it felt like he was jealous seeing other people give me the attention that he couldn't give me himself. Or he wouldn't. The Barstool opportunity led to a TV interview at a Boston area station. This was a dream come true. and also the entire reason I went into the TV industry after college. One of my friends drove with me and we vlogged it, and we had a blast. I asked my ex to watch it and support me. That was now the coolest thing that had ever happened. After the interview, I called him and asked if he did. He said that he didn't, and he chose not to because something about he doesn't read his mom's night school homework or something, meaning that he doesn't care about other people's work and accomplishments. Yeah, that broke my heart. That was the final straw. November 16th, we had a fight on FaceTime. I accused him of being ashamed of me and too scared to stand by me because of his fear of his father's disapproval. I told him I wanted to move to New York City and be a big fashion designer. He told me he had told his dad about that plan, and his dad said that he wouldn't be happy there, and he just wanted the white picket fence life. He also later told me that he had considered breaking up with me because I couldn't get pregnant. Didn't know that at the time. So on this FaceTime call, we had this very defining moment of silence where we both took our sides and didn't say anything else. It was clear that our relationship was over. We had been together for over 2 years. I told him I needed a break, and he hung up. I called my mom crying and told her, and she came down to the city and got a hotel room to stay with me. She kept me company and helped me figure out how to officially end things with him. The next morning, I broke up with him via text message. Not the best way to do it in hindsight, but he had hurt me so much that I didn't want to look in his eyes again. I don't actually remember what he said back, but I think he was really sad, and I think he said something about hoping that things might work out in the future at some point. My mom suggested I stay with friends that night, so I made plans. I also had another podcast that night, which I did, and then she dropped me off in Eastie at my friend's place. God bless her and her boyfriend. They took me in, they made me dinner, and we did face masks and looked up therapists for me. But that night, the realization of freedom started setting in. I was curious, hungry for the attention that I deserved, and I was angry. Feeling the way that I was feeling in that moment, I realized that my ex was no longer standing in my way of getting what I wanted. So I Snapchatted my business coach and I told him I had a crush on him. He said that he had always been into me and into trans girls, and we started sexting. He wanted me to come over and hook up with him, but I didn't want to ditch the friends who were helping me and giving me a place to sleep. He said, "That's not how this works," and started getting really controlling, so I told him no, and I stayed with my friends. The next night, November 18th, I was alone at my apartment after work, and I still had that curious feeling. I thought maybe I would find men who were more into trans women on Grindr instead of where I met my first boyfriend, which was Bumble, and I was also using Tinder. So I downloaded Grindr. I met another Northeastern student who lived down the street from me, and I went over. That was my first hookup. He was very sweet, and he said he was bi, and he was supportive of my body. But I felt so dirty and bad that I was doing a hookup. He introduced me to casual kink, like role-playing rougher sex, and I told him that I wanted it rough. So he pushed me against a bookshelf and then pinned my head to the floor and made me beg for it. I thought that was overwhelming but super fun. It was all consensual, and outside of the role play, he was extremely sweet, and I spent the night with him. I kind of wanted to date him, but he didn't seem emotionally available at all. The next day, November 19th, the day I got hunted. That morning, I woke up with my new friend, and I was a little sad that he wasn't my ex. I missed my ex, how he smelled, and how he cuddled me. I felt this crushing emptiness and sadness. So I said goodbye to my friend, and I went to work. At work, I told my friends what happened, and I called myself a slut for trying to get the attention I needed. And God bless my friend Cassie. And she made me promise her that I would text her where I was going and if I was okay if I went on more hookups. I also told my friends that I didn't want another relationship. I just wanted to have fun. And my friends really looked out for me when I needed it most. But my new friend with benefits couldn't hang out again that night. I didn't want to go home alone. And I still wanted all that attention and excitement that he gave me. I got on Grindr in the work bathroom. And I started asking several men in the area if they wanted to hook up that evening. One of them was an older man who offered to pick me up in his car and take me for a ride through the city. I made plans with him, but I wasn't super committed to them. I was a little cautious, not being safe, but was like, this doesn't seem great. But then I met who I will call the hunter, and I made plans with him instead. Okay. Shit's about to get rough, so let's take a quick break and check in. If you are still listening, grab a stuffed animal or a blanket, something soft, and sit in a quiet place. If you're feeling anxious, please consider whether or not you want to hear more. I'm anxious, but I'm very excited to be getting through this and getting this over with. And I'm going to go ahead and practice self-care, and I'm going to grab my blanket and my stuffed animals. So when I was a camp counselor at the trans camp that I volunteered at, and the camp that I had gone to in high school, we asked every camp counselor, every kid, to bring a stuffed animal to support group circle. So bring them. Back in the work bathroom on Grindr, I started talking to a guy who had BDSM on his profile. His bio said that he was a dom and was looking for group play. I asked him what he was looking for, and he said young and smooth. I asked him if he wanted to hang out that evening because I didn't want to go home alone. And he said he had to get up early for a funeral the next morning. I was desperate, clearly. And I said, "Oh, it's okay. I have to get up early for work too. I don't mind." He wouldn't give me an answer, but he asked for my Snapchat. I got back to my apartment and I started sexting him, trying to get him to take the bait. I really wanted to be with an older man. He started texting me back, and finally I asked again if I could come over. He gave me his address, and around 10 o'clock that night, I got in a Lyft and left campus. For context, I was 21. This man was almost 40 and lived in a suburb just outside the city. He lived in a really shitty townhouse that overlooked the city. When I got out of the Lyft, I saw him open the door. I walked up to him and I started to say hi. But before I could do so, he kissed me. I was confused. He hadn't seemed super interested in me at all thus far. I followed him up the stairs into the house. It was a fucking crack den. There were doors hanging off hinges, piles of possessions dumped everywhere, almost no lights. He took me to the sun porch on the second floor, which had been poorly converted into a bedroom. There was a latch lock on the outside of the door, which I remember thinking was weird, but I didn't actively process it. Inside his room, there was a bare, dirty mattress with a thin black sheet and no pillows. I couldn't see anything because there were no lights in the room at all. The only light was the street light coming in through the blinds. I wonder if he knew that I was desperate. Probably. Was he looking for that? Probably. I told him that I had almost made plans to get in someone's car and take a ride around the city. And he said, "You need to shut that off." And I was like, "I don't know what to do. I'm scared." So he told me what to do. And then we laughed about it. And I thought that I was safer being with him than getting in someone's car. So we sat on his bed in the dark, and I cried about my breakup, which happened 3 days ago from that point. He told me that he would show me what true love really was, and he would ruin all men for me. Again, pushing 40, he said he was still in love with his 19-year-old ex who cut him off. And this ex was allegedly a college student. He had a basket of restraints in his nightstand. And I asked him to tell me about BDSM. And he said that if I wanted to do it, I would be his sub, and I would have to obey all of his commands, and he would be able to use me whenever he wanted. Let's be clear that this is not BDSM. There was no safe word, there were no outs, there was no consent. I did say that it sounded fun, but that was not unconditional consent to be used whenever and however he wanted. He started wanting to hook up with me. He was like twice my body size. I was maybe 160 pounds soaking wet. He was probably like, I don't know, 250 at least, 270. And also much taller than me. So his body was a little too big for my body, I'll just say that. I was pretty clear with him that I didn't think it was going to work. But he kept going. I started being in a lot of pain. I told him I really wanted him to stop. I told him no. And he ignored me. And at this point, I was in so much pain. And I was genuinely scared for my life for the first time ever. And I just remember staring at the wall and pretending I wasn't there and just hoping that the pain would stop and this would all be over. It would just be a bad dream. He just used me. And I had never been assaulted before. In my first job, I had my 75-year-old boss grab my ass, but nothing like this. So I didn't really know what was happening. I just remember being afraid. And like I said, this was not BDSM. This was not kink. This was not consent, non-consent. This was assault. I don't remember anything else that night. I did stay the night over. I remember waking up, but not really being awake. I don't know, very early in the morning. And I remember being like half awake and he was already pushing my head down, and I just went along with it because I was scared and obedient and I didn't know what was happening. I was not awake. Then I must have fallen back asleep. Daylight came. We're now in the morning and the light was coming through the windows. This is the first time I had seen his room in the light. There was like a suitcase on the floor with clothes spilling out. There was a huge bottle of vodka on his nightstand. There were lots of bottles of what I thought were prescription drugs on top of his closet. It looked like he had kind of been squatting there. It didn't really seem like a real bedroom. He also had roommates there. This was like a townhouse where lots of people had come and gone. It was close to a school, so there were international students living upstairs. And he said that he heard this couple, the couple upstairs, arguing from time to time. And when he saw the girl once, he told her that he would protect her if she needed. I didn't really know what to think about that, but I was like, that's endearing, right? And then he also told me that one of his other roommates who, and let's be real, I didn't see a single person while I was there. This was an abandoned crack house. But he said that another roommate had spilled food on the floor in the kitchen and refused to clean it up. And the hunter confronted him about it and basically got up in his face and threatened to physically assault him if he didn't clean up the food. So I'm not processing any of this, obviously. And I'm like, I gotta go to work. So we walked down the hill to the T, and he started pretending that he was my boyfriend. And I was like, what? He was like holding my hand. He was kissing me in front of other people. I was in this very manic place of, this must be the attention I was needing or deserving of. And I made a joke and said, how do you like your new toy? And he laughed and he said he didn't want to break it. He was love bombing hard, which means that he was very heavily trying to shift my reality into thinking I was in a relationship with him without ever consenting to it or agreeing to be in one or even wanting to be in one. Remember, I told my friends the day before I did not want to be in a relationship. But this man broke my spirit and my mind, and I became what he wanted me to be, and that was his quote unquote girlfriend. I felt the effects of this love bombing, and I just thought I had met the most amazing person ever, who made everything sound great, who told me he would make all of my dreams come true. I tried to tell him I love him. He wouldn't let me, and he wouldn't say it back, even though he was love bombing me. We took the tea. I went to work. He went to what he says was a funeral. At work, I texted my best friend, Bria, and joked about being used, bruised, and abused, and saying that I learned how to be a sub, and it was hot. I tried to downplay the age difference. I said, you know, he really acts like he's 27, so let's just say that he's 27. And she was like, AJ, no. I was joking about being used and being in pain but being obsessed with this guy. I was having a fawn response, which is a trauma response. Fawning is when you're afraid of someone who hurts you and you try to basically like suck up to them and be sweet and do everything they want so that they don't hurt you. He also told me that our agreement was I had to go back every night. So, I felt like I owed him. And I went back that night. This was the 20th. I think I took the T and walked up the hill because Lyft was so expensive. I walked up like a mile up the hill. And when I got there, I asked him to give me water. And his kitchen was a couple rooms away from the quote-unquote bedroom, and he would always close the door when he went to the kitchen to get me water. I never saw him make it or get it. It was always behind closed doors. So he gave me water. I drank it. Then he started telling me that he was Roma, which I think the non-PC term is GYP. I literally don't know anything. And everything I've heard from him, I don't know if it's even true. But he said that he was Roma, which is a culture where they can practice magic. He said he knew how to do energy work, and he knew how to activate certain energy pools in the body. And he said that he could activate a part of my spine that would like shut off my nervous system and make me act like a baby. I don't remember if that actually happened, but I remember laughing about that and being like, what the hell? Like, you know magic? Please show me. I believed everything. I was eating every fucking word up. Every word was truth. So he said, all right, let's show you. And he started rubbing my back and saying, you're going to feel sensations. I'm moving your energy. And I was like, yeah, I think I'm feeling something. And then everything went black. Everything was black for maybe 30 or 45 minutes. I remember waking up very confused, very dizzy. I didn't know what was going on. He was yelling at me. I didn't know why he was yelling at me. I don't even remember falling asleep. I just started sobbing and begging for him to forgive me. And he said that in this period of time I didn't remember, I had been saying horrible things about him. And I said, I don't remember that. I don't remember that. Please forgive me. Please forgive me. My next memory of that night was we were laying on our backs, and he told me that the magic would let me see visions, and I would have insights about myself and the universe and my past lives. And I was hallucinating. For the first time in my life, I saw like spire cathedrals. I had a vision that we were laying on hay in an old horse barn. He told me we had been lovers in a past life in the Middle Ages. I thought I was psychic. I was like, oh my God, my best friend her mom has cancer, which, for context, she did tell me that her mom had cancer. I had just forgot it. And that memory had somehow resurfaced during this hallucination episode, and I thought I was psychic. I was fully brainwashed. I was in a loss of reality. This was also the first time in my life I had ever been high. I had never been high before. I had never had any drugs. So I believed it was all magic. And every night I went back. The round-the-clock drugging, the round-the-clock assault and abuse continued. The brainwashing. I was completely under his control. I would still go to work. He would still let me go to work. He just told me that he needed to know what everyone was saying about him, and he needed to know who I was talking to and where I was at all times. And he would get very angry very quickly if he smelled any distrust or me questioning anything he said or did. I wasn't allowed to do that. I told my coworkers that I was in a new relationship after 3 days. My friends told me that that is not what I needed, and also that there's something seriously wrong with a nearly 40-year-old going after a 21-year-old. And I was like, you guys are just judgmental. Ugh. Like, my family also didn't know at this point what was going on. This guy told me he needed a new job. I never saw him go to an office. I never saw him work from home. He claimed he was a sales rep for AT&T or something. Never saw him work. Fully convinced he was just mooching off his family. But he told me he needed a new job, so I set him up with a LinkedIn profile, and I tried to get him an interview with one of the people at my work. I was at a fashion event one night. I was still going back to clubs my club events and trying to see my friends. But he told me I had to be back by 8 o'clock. I had a curfew. And I remember telling my roommate that we would be visiting the next day because we were going to go to a concert. November 23rd. I started the day at his house, sending Snapchat videos to my friends with him, trying to prove he was real and good for me, because my friends had been so blatantly concerned. I even joked about being held hostage. I think on some level I felt like I was, but I couldn't explain that or acknowledge that, so I just joked it off. And he was also pressuring me to send these videos so that everyone in my life would let him use me without intervening. I also looked really intoxicated in those videos, and I do not recall ever using anything with him outside of the one vodka soda I drank that night at the concert. This was a concert I was supposed to go to with my first boyfriend, who bought me tickets. When we broke up, I still have the tickets. I asked this guy to go with me. My mom asked me who I was going to the concert with because I didn't have a boyfriend anymore, and I think I said a friend from work or something. At this concert, he acted like a bodyguard. He physically blocked me away from every other person there. And again, like I said, this is the only time I ever willingly consumed anything with him, a vodka soda. November 24th, I told my mom about him. I knew she was going to be upset and concerned, so I had started writing drafts of what to say in my notes app. And he was coaching me. He was telling me what I needed to say. He was anticipating her objections and telling me how to work around them and basically gaslight her. He was trying to gaslight her through me. My mom asked me how old he was. I sent a picture. I had sent a picture of us on the bridge over the Charles or whatever on the way to the concert. And it was a picture of us kissing. And she said, "How old is he?" And I said, "Almost 40. And she wrote, "Gulp." And this guy made fun of her and started saying, "Gulp!" Like making a huge joke out of it. And I was like, yeah, fuck my mom. She's so judgmental. Yeah, and my parents were obviously concerned. We couldn't see eye to eye on it. She told me I needed therapy. And she told me she was very worried about me. And my best friend told me that I was distancing myself from her and that she was worried about him and she was worried about me when I was with him. We used to FaceTime every day, and that had gone down to maybe once a week, maybe once every other week. I told her that he wouldn't let me be on my phone much because he was older and it was a millennial thing. And he told me that she was a bad friend and she wasn't good for me. And he was starting to isolate me from all the people who I loved and the people who were worried about me. I had a new collection coming out for my clothing brand that I had continued to work on. And I shot it at a friend's apartment. I think at some level still was kind of convinced that people wouldn't believe me when I said it was a relationship. So I told my friend Anshul that it was a dick appointment, that's the reason I had a curfew, is I had to go back for a dick appointment. I did this shoot with my friends and it went late because we were doing a lot of makeup and a lot of props. And he started getting extremely mad and messaging me and saying I was a horrible partner, and he was not respecting the fact that this was a huge moment for me. I had worked hard on building this collection. I was spending time with friends. He just told me I needed to go back to him immediately. And this was during the shoot. I remember telling my friend Anshul that I was scared. But after I finished the shoot, I went back to his house like I did. And suddenly, he started taking a huge interest in my fashion brand. He told me I needed to have the biggest fashion show ever. The biggest trans fashion show ever, with all trans models. And I had seen him on Grindr when I was with him, and I was confused because I thought that we were together and that we were faithful and that we were monogamous. And I didn't know why he was on Grindr. And I asked him, and he made me feel bad about asking. And he said, "You can look through my phone whenever you want. You can look through my phone whenever you want." But he started recruiting other college students to be models for me. He would send them my Instagram and say that if they gave him their contact information, then they could be in a runway show. And I told him that I didn't have another collection planned. I didn't have any resources to be able to do a huge fashion show. And he told me it didn't matter, and I had to trust him, and I had to go along with what he said. So essentially, he took over my clothing brand that I created to make trans people like myself feel more confident. So he was recruiting models for me off of Grindr, other trans college students who were my age, with the promise of huge fashion opportunities. And there was no show planned. There never was a show. There never would have been a show. This was a scam. This was just bait for him to get the contact information of more people like me. And when he would get the contact information, he would send it to me and then ask me to reach out to them and become friends with them. And I would ask them what they wanted to wear that would make them feel more confident in their transition. He recruited 25 models for me. For some reason that I do not know, he let me go home for Thanksgiving. He didn't stop me. Maybe so
my parents wouldn't call the police when I didn't come home. But the whole time I was gone, he, I wasn't really gone. He kept constant control over me. And this whole time, I was still reaching out to these new models and being friends with them. Some of whom I'm still friends to this day. One day when I was home for Thanksgiving, I went over to my friend Bria's house because I missed her. And I wanted to believe that she was a good friend because he told me that she wasn't. So we got in my car and we went to one of our favorite stores and bought a shit ton of Pokemon cards. Went back to her house and opened them all and did makeup. And he started sensing that I wasn't believing him. And he started getting desperate. And he like made this really like Coke rant Pokemon rap that was so fucking scary and weird and like detailed and like only someone on meth or something could have made that. And he sent it to me, and I sent a Snapchat of my friend and I like of Brie and I like screaming and being like, "What the fuck?" um, it really freaked us out. And then he also sent me a picture of his bedroom wall where he had all of the sticky notes that he had me draw my hallucinations on. And before I left, I had also drawn a picture of him, and he put it on the wall with the sticky notes and sent a picture to me. I can't believe I fucking have that evidence. But I do. While I was home, I tried to convince my parents that they should give him a chance. I said, you can just talk to him on the phone. You can ask him questions. Like, he's a good person. They refused. They were horrified. They wanted nothing to do with him, and they were had no idea who I was at that point. I even reached out to an event organizer in Boston and connected her with this guy because of this promise to have the biggest fashion show ever. And I took the bus back to Boston and took a lift back to his house on December 1st. That night, I was finishing the campaign video for my new collection, and he told me how to edit it, and he told me what I needed to do for my website. And then I said, "Wow, you've done so much. I need to give you credit. How do you want me to credit you?" And he just wanted me to credit him as his first name and my partner. The cycle continued. I'd go to work, go back every night, get used, get drugged, be continued to be broken into the mold of being compliant and obedient and believing, never questioning everything, or never questioning anything. And my parents were scared that I was talking with them less and less once I went back the second time. And I shut off Find My Friends, which we have a family group, so we all know where each other are. And I left the group, so they didn't know where I was. So, December 4th, my throat started hurting at work. I kept trying to drink tea and other things to make the pain stop. I was having a hard time drinking and swallowing and eating and talking. I thought I had strep. I told him I wanted to leave work and go to the doctor's and get a swab. And for some reason, I felt like I had to ask permission to do that. He told me no. And he told me to use the magic he had taught me instead. So I went into the library room at Aquia. I sat on the couch. I put my hand over my throat. I pictured a green light like he told me to. And I tried to imagine myself healing. I did it for several minutes and nothing happened. I went back to work. I was still in pain. I said, fuck it. I left work and I went to Fenway Health. And I told him that I had to go. I just had to go get swabbed. He was mad at me. But he told me while I was there that I should get on PrEP. Which I didn't know why he asked me to do that. Because he said he was on PrEP. And as far as I knew, we were monogamous. So I didn't question it. I did what he said. I asked my doctor. She said, why would I need it if I didn't have multiple partners? And I said, I don't know. But I need to. She didn't give it to me. Or I just dropped it. But he was now trying to take over my medical care and make decisions about my health. I tested negative for strep. I also got STD tested. Both came back negative. How? I don't know. And then I went back to his house with my work laptop and I told my boss I was working from home the next day. December 5th. I was working from home, doing my recruiting, making calls, sending emails, naked, under that thin black sheet on a bare mattress, because one of his rules was if I was on his bed, I was not allowed to wear clothes, so that he had full access to me whenever he wanted. I gave up on making calls because my voice was now gone. I told my friends at work that I had to just switch to email and texting because I couldn't talk. My family had somehow convinced me to schedule an emergency therapy session for that night. But because I couldn't talk, I canceled it. And that was another opportunity I lost to get help because of him. So I stopped working. I wasn't eating. I was very weak. I couldn't swallow anything. I couldn't talk. I was only drooling into a bag. He left and he brought me bone broth. And I cried as the sun went down. My throat closed. The only way I could communicate was by typing on my notes app. I begged to go to the hospital because I was scared. He told me no. He said that I only had a cold and that he would take care of me. He also told me not to tell my parents and that I didn't want them to be any more worried about me than they already were. My body was in crisis. I kept begging on my notes app for him to let me go to the hospital, and I begged him to go with me because I couldn't talk for myself. I kept begging. And finally, for reasons I don't know, he agreed, as long as he spoke for me and was my guardian. And that action saved my life. I saved my life. We took a lift to a local hospital. I couldn't talk at check-in. The lady at the desk was confused. I didn't go in via ambulance. I just went into walk-in urgent care. He talked for me, and I put him down as my in case of emergency contact on the medical paperwork instead of my parents. And at this point, I had now fully chosen him over my own family. And I'm saying choosing very lightly because that choice was made for me. They checked me in. I got on meds. I was in so much pain. A lot of the meds they gave me didn't work. They put me on morphine. And once I had that druggy rush hit me again, I felt safe because I felt like I was back at his house. I felt bad that he was there at the hospital with me, so I kept trying to make him play my Game Boy emulator so that he wouldn't be bored because I felt like I was burdening him by being in the hospital, even though he put me there. He put me there. He still didn't want me to tell my parents that I was at the hospital, but once I was on enough morphine that I could whisper, I snuck my phone out. I called my mom while he was sitting next to me. And I told her that they said that I needed to have surgery. And I asked her to come down and get me. He was mad, but he was around doctors and nurses, so he was pretty limited in what he could do. They said that they didn't have someone who could operate there, so they transferred me to Mass General in an ambulance, and the Hunter rode with me. When I got there, they wheeled me right into the ICU, and I was surrounded by 20 or 30 nurses and doctors, all like talking at me and running around me and freaking out, and I had no idea what was happening. And they took a clamp and put it in my mouth and said that there was an abscess that had grown in the back of my throat, up on the roof of my mouth, and had closed my esophagus and was going to close my airway next. And they had to operate immediately so that I wouldn't suffocate. They told me this was a paratonsillar abscess. And they also wrote in the medical notes that they had a concern for Ludwig's angina, which is another kind of like snap trap condition where your muscles all shut, and basically either way, if they didn't operate, I was gonna suffocate and die. I asked them, I whispered, I said, can you give me like anything for pain before that you do it? And they gave me an injection into my mouth. I screamed, and they didn't even take a moment to let it set in. They just went in with scalpels and pliers, and they cut into my throat, and they squeezed and drained the abscess, and I screamed and asked them to stop, begged them to stop. I said, I needed to stop, and they'd let me stop for a couple seconds, and then they'd be like, we just have to keep going, and they just keep going. And I blacked out a lot of it, and he just sat there and watched me scream because of an injury he caused. And he didn't want me to go to the doctor to begin with. Medical records described a partner at bedside. Some other records described him as a family member. On my medical records, I denied using any substances. After the surgery, I was taken to a recovery room on heavy antibiotics. I was very weak. They told me I needed nutrition. My mom finally arrived. She met the guy. I think she hugged him to be nice, but she was terrified. And he was really hostile towards her. He tried to assert himself as my caretaker, not her. And he would demand that I drink water and try to prove to my mom that he was my guardian now. And he would go out and take smoke breaks, though. And in those times, my mom would ask me if I was okay and ask me why he wasn't leaving. And I said, I don't want him to leave. I love him. He even bought me a stuffed sloth in the hospital gift shop to encourage me to take it slow and rest. He refused to leave completely, so we all spent the night together in my hospital room. My mom slept in a chair. I tried to get my mom to like him by making him talk about the crazy stories about his life. The next day, I was well enough to be discharged with a prescription of heavy antibiotics. We all got in my mom's car, and she drove to his house and dropped him off. The second the door closed, she told me, he's dangerous. You need to get rid of him. And I said, what do you mean? I'm in love with him. My mom took me to a hotel. The hunters started messaging me, calling me, saying that I wasn't safe around my mom and demanded that I return to him immediately. While I was in the hotel, my mom thought I was talking to a coworker or boss, because when I was on calls, she was only hearing me say yes or no, or just yes. Yes, and I'm sorry. I was just answering to commands. She couldn't understand why I was still talking to him. We got in a fight. She said she was extremely worried about me. And I told her that she didn't need to be. So she started packing up her stuff. And tried to leave. And I begged her to stop. And I cried and I said, I need you, Mom. So she stayed. We sat on her bed and she asked me, why him? And I said, I'm in love with him. And she said, why? I said, he's had such a unique life. He's such a cool person. And she said, you can find other people with cool lives who can treat you better. She finally started to make some ground with me, and I texted the guy and said, I think we need to take some space and heal. And I was like, I'm going into another breakup. I still thought this was a relationship. I still thought I was in love. This guy told me I ruined his night and he didn't want to talk to me. I go to dinner with my mom. I try to stay off my phone. I am sitting completely dissociated at the dinner table. And I eventually check my phone and see several missed calls. And I responded to him and said, I thought you didn't want to talk to me. And he said, I changed my mind. And he said that he was going to sleep with his ex if I didn't come back. And then I was too afraid to block him because I was afraid he would come after me. So it felt safer to stay in touch with him and let him continue to emotionally abuse me through threats and intimidation. December 9th, woke up, messages, phone full of scary, scary messages. I blocked him. My mom watched me take an Uber to work. I felt safe around my friends. I told them I was scared. But I told all of the models he had recruited to stay away from him. There was no show, and he was scary and dangerous. But unfortunately, I'll explain why that wasn't enough. I was conditioned to be a sex slave at this point. So I fell down a spiral of hookups, probably like 10 or 15 in like 2 weeks. He found me on Grindr and demanded that I return his sweatshirt of personal significance. I was like terrified that he found me. He also found me on Twitter and DM'd me. My mom and I mailed back his sweatshirt and his hat, which for some reason I had still had because I didn't go back. I was back at my apartment every night bringing in strange men to serve them. And I was doing that while my roommates were there. At least I was living with 2 other girls my age in college, and one of them had finished classes and went home, but one of them was on co-op and was still there at the end of December with me. And I was bringing in men while she was there without telling her. And I even walked by her with a man to my bedroom one night. I am so sorry, Lauren and Christine, that I put you in danger. I didn't know that I was putting you in harm's way. One of those hookups was my ex. We went to dinner as friends. We went back to my apartment, hooked up, and we asked each other how the other was moving on, which he wasn't. I was now in a full state of psychosis, intense manic episodes, huge behavior changes. I started destroying my apartment. I tried to set my space heater on fire by spraying hairspray into it. I sprayed silly string on every corner of my room. I spent hundreds of dollars at stores buying whatever I wanted. And continued just hook up, hook up, hook up. My infection returned in my throat. On the 20th of December, I went back to the hospital. My mom was worried that she wouldn't get there in time, so she called my ex and had him meet me there. That was very complicated, but it was comforting at the same time because I knew him and he felt safer than that guy. I got CT scans. They said the abscess wasn't back, but the infection was. My mom took us back to my apartment. I passed out on the couch, weak again, just sick. And my mom and my ex packed my apartment so that I could move back home for the holidays. And I kissed him and he left. And my mom took me home. I continued to crash out. My parents confronted me about my behavior. They were extremely scared. They thought I was a stripper. My dad was scared and angry. I thought my dad was that guy. And I thought that my dad wanted to hurt me. So I banned him from my room. And I stopped talking to him for a few days. That was the earliest indication I had of PTSD, and I didn't understand that yet. My parents said I was off the rails and in crisis. My mom tried checking me into a mental hospital, but I wouldn't let her. We had a family therapy session. It did not go well. On New Year's Day, 2020, that was the last time I talked to that guy consensually. I had unblocked him feeling guilty. He told me that he was mad at me because I wasn't there for him on the anniversary of his grandfather's death. He reminded me that no one else could call me Allie, which was the nickname he gave me that no one else could use. I told him I thought he raped me. And I don't remember what he said back, probably something deflective and manipulative. And I blocked him what I thought was for good. Quick check-in before final thoughts. If you're still listening, I hope you are still in a safe place, still with comforting objects and surroundings. And I hope that you are doing okay. And if you want to keep listening, please continue to take care of yourself. The immediate aftermath of this experience, I immediately started dating another guy. I was desperate. I was looking for controlling, emotionally unstable men. I moved back to Boston, which was not a good idea, but I wouldn't have let my parents keep me in Bangor. January 14th, somehow I got a voicemail from that guy. He told me that one of the models I had recruited was in distress. And he wouldn't tell me who it was, and he wouldn't tell me what was wrong, but he told me I had to talk to him to get those answers and help my friend. It was blackmail. It scared me to death. He ended the voicemail by saying, "We'll see what the future holds," and tried to make me second guess leaving him. I asked my friend to walk me to my club meeting across campus the next day because I was afraid. She asked me if the police were involved, and I said I didn't know when to cross that line. I was so scared to get the police involved because I didn't know what happened. I just knew I was scared. And I was afraid that he would find me and punish me if I went to the police. The next day, one of the models reaches out and tells me that this guy offered her free rent in exchange for sexual favors. This is the first time I knew that he was going after someone else that I knew. I told her to block him and stay away from him. I almost quit my fashion club that day because I was so scared. I was starting to shut down and change behavior long term. A couple months later, one of the models texts me, a different model, and asks me what I can tell him about that guy. And that friend told me that the same thing had just happened to him that I went through for several weeks. I'm not going to share the details of my friend's experience. I'm just going to say that comparing notes helped me realize that I had been drugged. And this friend told me that the guy told him he was going to show up on his campus, and he was terrified and also had friends walking with him to classes. I talked to a family friend who was a police officer. He told me that I would have to see this man in court if I went forward, and I got too scared. I had even made an appointment to go down to the police where it happened and tell them, and I canceled it because I was too scared. I sent another warning to all the models he had recruited. I said, "Please, I'm begging you, stay away from him." Several of them blocked me and unfriended me, and that made me feel helpless. Northeastern offered me resources, but I didn't use them because I just wanted it all to go away. I don't remember a lot of 2020 and 2021 because I was psychotic. I had no sense of reality. There was a point when he made a new phone number and contacted me and was immediately trying to suck me back in with the gaslighting and emotional abuse. Two years later, my friend asked me to go forward. And go with him to the police. I told him I was still too scared. And I felt so guilty that I set myself on fire. This psychotic episode lasted for years. By the spring of 2023, I was creating a burlesque show and I wanted to live in my car. My family intervened and they said they thought I had bipolar and I needed to get a psychiatrist. I did start getting help then. Last spring, the spring of 24, I had done what I thought was enough healing to go forward, And I reached out to my friend and asked him if he wanted to go forward. And he said he wanted to just forget about it. So I went down to the police alone. I finally gave a statement. They said they were sorry that happened to me and that they believed me. And they'd see what they could do. A few months later, I heard that the district attorney wanted to speak with me and wanted to pick up my case. I went down. He didn't promise. He said he couldn't promise anything, but he promised they would investigate. They also told me that if they went forward with an investigation and if they did decide to press charges, that they would have to interview him and talk to him and tell him what I said. And they said I could look into a restraining order if I wanted. And I looked into what a restraining order entailed, and I found out that it meant that I had to see him in court, and I would have to tell the judge in front of him what he did to me and why I didn't want to be near him while I'm in the same room as him. So I didn't do that. This spring, months into this process, the DA finally got back to me. I went down on January 6th. They dropped my case. They told me that because I didn't have a rape kit, there's nothing they could do. And on paper, what happened looked like a consensual BDSM relationship. They didn't even look at my medical records from the hospital. I asked them if they wanted to, and they said it was not necessary. But when I had an advocate in that meeting speak up for me and say, hey, you should look at the medical records, they said, oh, well, we'd be more than happy to look at anything you have. And I spoke up and said, then why did you tell me no? So we shook hands and I ran out of that building. After everything happened, and after getting into therapy and getting on meds, I started to remember a lot of what happened. And I didn't really know what to call it for a long time. I thought it was kidnapping. I thought it was trafficking. I don't know. I know it was at least sexual assault and drugging, but the more memories came in, the more I keep questioning. Coercive control is when someone uses psychological manipulation and intimidation and fear and threats to control another person, which may not show up as physical abuse. That was happening even though I almost died. So this man isolated me from my friends and family. He told me his family would have raised me as a girl from the start, unlike my parents. After I told him that I regret not knowing sooner and not transitioning sooner, and that maybe if I did, I would have been better for my first boyfriend. And I think the reason why my throat closed was because he would hold my head down without letting me breathe, even though I was choking and he was strangling me. He never had food at his house. I ate snacks at work, or the only other food I got was if I paid for it and had it delivered. It was fucking December, and I couldn't wear clothes while I was sleeping, even though he had no sheets and no blankets. And I was cold. I mentioned he had the lock outside of his door on the outside. I wonder now, did he ever actually lock anyone in there? This was not a romantic relationship. Maybe I had Stockholm Syndrome. So why did it happen? I didn't even know I was acting different. There's so much I don't know still. There's more I could learn in the future. I want to know why he does this to people. Was it because he had child abuse in his own life? Maybe he had only been used to being rejected, so he had to drug and assault people to get what he wanted. He told me he had jaw surgery at some point. So maybe he became an opioid addict. He had circular scars on his arms. I never knew what those were. Were they track marks? I don't know. Yes, I went there. But I did not ask for what happened, and I did not deserve it. He taught me what fear truly was. I began a life of always feeling hunted and always looking over my shoulder. Always afraid he'd come and finish the job. He exploited my trust, my generosity, and desire to help others. He was a predator who went after young people. Was he a pedophile? Was he going after people who were actually minors? I don't know. I considered suicide for a long time. Because I can't get rid of the memory. And I can't forgive what happened. And I still have a hard time knowing what's real and what's not. When I don't know what's real, I start punching myself in the head until I do. I cut myself to punish myself for having the memories and being alive still. I always feel like I'm still living a double life of trying to be normal and go to work, but then going home and having those memories of having to always go back to his house and be abused. My mom told me that she thought I would have ended up in the Charles River, at the bottom of it. And I still have questions like, should someone have called police? Or would I have run away? Or was he too good at what he was doing to disguise the abuse? I also want to know what would have happened if I had stayed. My therapist thinks that because there was no fashion show and it was all a scam to recruit people, she thinks that he was starting a trafficking operation. And I asked her if that's where I would have ended up, was being trafficked, sex trafficked. And she said she didn't think I would survive that long. So I live with CPTSD. I have so much shame. When I get scared, sometimes I black out because I don't want to remember anything else. There's moments when I get triggered when I lose control of my face, which feels like a seizure, even though I don't have epilepsy. I'm trying to get an MRI to figure that out. My therapist is worried that the drugging and the lack of oxygen during the abuse gave me possibly mini strokes or a traumatic brain injury. I have nightmares and dissociate all the time. I have sleep paralysis while I'm awake when I have flashbacks and my body shuts off. I've gone through phases of being obsessed with him and deifying him, trying to find out where he is. I want to go back to that house sometimes, and I want to find answers. I'm scared to be safe because what he put me through sometimes feels safer and what I'm used to. I want to ask his family if they know what's going on, if they know how many people he's hurt. Part of me wants to follow every breadcrumb, every trail, talk to every single model who he recruited and ask them if they got hurt too and compare details, but I don't have the heart to do it. I have a hard time being in the state of Massachusetts. When people compliment me, I think I'm being groomed. Over the past 3 years, I've been working in news, and I left pretty recently. In my last week of working in news, I saw his cousin on TV, and his family was getting praised and getting nationally recognized for something good that was happening to them. And his cousin looked just like him. And I ran out of the booth and tried to throw up, but I couldn't throw anything up. And my therapist called that vagal nerve triggers, which she says is when you get so scared that your body is trying to shut down and get ready to die. Up until a few weeks ago, I still couldn't accept that this happened to me. I didn't want to. But since the justice system failed me, and I wasn't able to stop him or get justice, what do I do? So I thought about making a podcast. I had this moment of reckoning where I had to radically accept what happened, even though I didn't like it. And I sat alone in the woods. And I tried to ask God why I was still alive. And outside of loving my boyfriend and being there for my family and pursuing my creative interests, still the only reason I can think of is to help people. Thank you for listening, and I hope that it was helpful in any way, even if it's just you knowing that things like this actually happen to people, especially trans people. I just want you to know that if you need help, we do have resources on our website. It's thewillofthehunted.com/resources. In the next episode, I'm going to be talking with my boyfriend about his perspective on being in a relationship with someone with PTSD and how we make it work, and what his advice or suggestions would be to other people who love people who have been through things like me. And so, thank you. And I will see you next week, Tuesday at 6 p.m.
Watch or listen to The Will of the Hunted every Tuesday at 6 p.m. Eastern. You are not alone.